The morning Josiah was crowned, the air itself felt like it was holding its breath. He was only 8 years old. The palace halls of Judah stretched tall and echoing around him. Stone columns cold even beneath the rising sun. Incense drifted faintly from yesterday's offerings, but it carried a tiredness, like worship done out of habit rather than fire. Josiah stood small in the center of it all, his robes too heavy on his shoulders. His fingers tightened around the arm of the priest beside him without him even noticing. "Breathe," someone whispered gently. His throat tightened anyway, and then the oil was poured. It ran down his head slowly, warm against his skin, marking him as king over a nation he barely understood, and a people already drifting far from the ways of Yahuwah. The sound of trumpets rose, and just like that, the boy was no longer only a boy. Years passed in a kingdom that had forgotten how to remember. Josiah grew quietly at first, watching, learning, listening more than speaking. The streets of Jerusalem smelled of sacrifices mixed with neglect, but something sacred had been left out too long in the open air. Idols stood where prayer should have lived. Stone figures stared blindly from hilltops, casting long shadows across the land meant to belong to Yahuwah. Josiah felt it all, even when no one else seemed to. Something was wrong, but he was still young, still forming, still becoming. Then came the year everything shifted. Josiah was 16 when something stirred deep in him, like a fire waking beneath ashes. He began to seek Yahuwah not just as tradition, but as truth. At 20, he began to act. He ordered the tearing down of idols. Altars cracked beneath hammers, wooden images splintered, the air filled with dust and broken stone, sharp and choking, as generations of rebellion were physically pulled apart. Some people wept, some resisted, but Josiah's fingers tightened at his sides, and he did not stop, because now he saw what had been hidden in plain sight, and it could not stay. Then came the day of temple restoration. Workers were repairing the house of Yahuwah when it had happened. A scroll was found, old, dust-covered, forgotten. When it was brought to Josiah, the room changed, even before he opened it. His throat tightened as he unrolled it slowly, as though he had already knew this moment would split his life in two. The words burned as he read. Covenant, commandments, truth long ignored. Silence filled the room so completely it felt like sound itself had left. Josiah's fingers tightened on the edge of the scroll. His breath trembled, and then it broke. His robe-torn grief as understanding crashed over him, not anger, but sorrow so deep it felt like the ground had fallen away beneath him. "We have not lived as we were called," he whispered. His voice shook, not because he was weak, but because he finally understood how far everything had drifted. He called the people together, and he read the covenant aloud. His voice carried across Jerusalem like a bell ringing through fog. Some bowed their heads, some stood frozen, but something had begun that could not be undone. A renewal, a return, a trembling hope. The Passover was restored in a way the nation had not seen for generations. Family gathered again in obedience. The air smelled of roasted lamb and unleavened bread, of remembrance returning like a forgotten song. For a moment, it felt like the land itself could breathe again. But even faithful hearts live in fragile times. Later, when Pharaoh Necho of Egypt marched through the land, Josiah went out to meet him, though warned not to interfere. On the plains of Megiddo, the wind was harsh and dry, whipping dust across armored lines. Josiah stood among his men, his fingers tightened on his chariot. Something uneasy pressed against the moment, and the clash that followed. An arrow found its mark. The world tilted, sound faded, and Josiah, the boy who had become king at 8, the man who would turn the nation back toward Yahuwah, was carried away wounded. His last breath came quietly, like a candle fading rather than being snuffed out. Jerusalem mourned deeply. Lamentation filled the streets where reform had once begun with hope. But Josiah's legacy did not vanish with him, because even after the king was gone, the turning had already begun. And once a heart and the nation remembers Yahuwah again, it is never the same.